In Nigeria, when they released their Africa Pulse report, they painted a grim picture, a gloomy picture of the situation in Nigeria, expecting poverty to rise by 3.6 percentage points in 2027, and of course, through 5 years. And a lot of Nigerians have been reacting. We are talking about reputable organizations here, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, raising concerns about Nigeria, about our economic reforms and policies. It seems as though our policies are not working. You will recall that when this administration came in, talking about the administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, they promised Nigerians a lot of things. For instance, they said maybe in the first 6 months that dollar to naira rate will reduce and all that. But we know what the situation is right now. Today, without being sentimental, as Nigerians, most of us are feeling the impact of the harsh realities of rising poverty and, of course, inflation. Just recently, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics also released their report showing that headline inflation has actually gone up, increased by, just comparing February to March, by 1.05% from 23.18 to 24.23. So the case is getting worse, and that's the reality of most Nigerians. But unfortunately, the presidency keeps telling Nigerians that things are getting better. So where is the disconnect here? Joining us on the conversation this morning is Mr. Ikechukwu Kalu. He is an economic analyst. He's an economic intelligence lead at Redwire Consulting. Thank you, Mr. Ikechukwu Kalu, for joining us on the program this morning.
Good morning, and thank you, Daniel, for inviting me here.
Oh, thank you for joining us. So this morning, Mr. Kalu, we are looking at the state of the nation, rising poverty in Nigeria. We just saw the picture painted by the World Bank, predicting that poverty will actually rise in Nigeria, and they also gave us figures. And let's compare that to the picture the federal government is painting. It's as if there is an illusion of progress here, which is contrary to what Nigerians are feeling. Before we go into the nitty-gritty of the topic, in your own opinion, what do you think is happening right here? Why do we have this disjoint between the reports from World Bank and IMF and what the federal government are claiming is happening in Nigeria?
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just delve into it right away. For the World Bank is looking at events. They look at events in times and project their outlook, while the federal government is probably dealing with their more domestic issues and then looking at its own macroeconomic data, which is different from the microeconomic data that determines poverty. So when some of these predictions come out like this, it's not to say that it is definite that it's going to happen. It's just that if you don't do A, B, C, this is where you might end up. Or if conditions continue to be like this is where you end up at by 2026, by 2027. However, their inference that poverty is increasing, it's also, it's very right that the fact that, and I'm not sure that the federal government has also denied that there are no challenges with Nigerians. And you've heard the president, I think he did 2 speeches last year where he said that be patient with us, and then pleading with people to show understanding that they were walking along that line. It's only around this year where you begin to hear that, okay, we are turning around the corner, and then there's some level of progress, which they have some numbers to back with. So the question is, what numbers are you looking at? What numbers? So it's a question of what numbers are both parties referring to, whether the World Bank, whether the federal government. That's how to distinguish. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right, Mr. Kalu. Let's look at this. Key data points illustrates the scale of challenge in 2023. For instance, 38.9% of Nigerians, approximately 87 million people, lived below the national poverty line, making Nigeria the world's second largest poor population after India. By 2024, 100 million Nigerians were in extreme poverty, reflecting a persistent upward trend. Inflation, driven by food and fuel price hikes, erodes purchasing power. And that's just part of the reports there, talking about data provided by the World Bank and the IMF. So Mr. Kalu, is quite clear that as it is right now, Nigerians are going through tough times. The World Bank have made their predictions, and like you rightly said, they are predictions which can actually be averted. We can actually do, if we do the right things, we can actually prevent that. But let's look at the current situation in Nigeria. It seems as though the government, they don't understand what the people are going through. The facts are there. The reality is there. Nigeria is fast becoming the poverty capital of the world. People are suffering. People are living in hardship. But it seems as though the federal government is not seeing it that way. Where do you think this disconnect is coming from?
Okay, so like I said, like I mentioned, I also said that when we look at what the federal government has done and when we look at what the prescription was before 2023, it gives us an idea. Between 2019 and 2022, predictions in terms of spring meetings were the fact that federal government needed to exit subsidies. There were clear predictions from IMF and World Bank that we needed to exit subsidies for us to have the fiscal headroom to be able to provide infrastructure, to be able to support and then be able to increase the level of investment in infrastructure that would aid production, that would get people to work, reduce the unemployment, and lessen the poverty rate. That's a classical way to be able to jumpstart an economy. And in 2023, that reform began with federal government removing the subsidy and removing the arbitrage in FX. For that has led to, and when you do such removal of subsidies, what happens is it's like a shock therapy. And so in that shock therapy, the economy itself as a whole feels that shock therapy. It's like taking your kid who's sick and then you give them a painful injection. Of course, it hurts at that moment, but then you know that with time, they're going to get better. But how long is it? How long is long enough? And so that's where the World Bank is showing concerns that if what is going on in the global economy persists, because Nigeria is a major, if you read that report, the underpinning reason was because our major income is oil, and the oil imports and the oil exports receipts are going to drop because, I mean, if we budgeted around $75 and oil is selling between $65 to $66 right now, then it tells us that we're going to get less receipts, and less receipts means that we can't fund the infrastructure that we so dearly need. We can't be able to invest in being able to poverty initiatives, various social services, other social services. And once that is not, those investments are not made, what you see there is the incidence of poverty, which already existed prior to now exacerbates continuously. And that's why that projection is that way. However, we can see that the initial steps prior to now, in terms of prediction, when they did a world outlook at the beginning of the year, this wasn't the conversation. They were bullish about the global economy. But when Trump came in, it changed the game because of the tariff spat they have with other countries, China and all of that is impacting the global market, is impacting the oil market, is impacting every market, and people are fleeing to safety. Global investors are fleeing to safety, and investments are drying up in emerging markets. So with that kind of scenario, it means that African countries who are heavily reliant on commodity exports have to watch their back. It means that the poverty is going to be aggravated once they're unable to meet that need. And so that advice from World Bank needs to be, of course, it needs to pay attention. And one thing we can use to be able to avert that is to ensure that we can develop other levers of economic growth, export of other commodities, maybe solid minerals, maybe human capital-led export growth. Those are the kind of things that we can now leverage on if oil is tanking, So we have to leverage on all of our levers to be able to avert that situation. But if we're going to continue being based on oil receipts, then I'm afraid there's very little that the FG can do that we can deal with in terms of the poverty rate.
Absolutely, Mr. Kalu. Now, talking about the factors responsible for the rise in poverty now, apart from the fact that the World Bank mentioned, like you rightly said, our over-reliance on oil, our oil resources, our over-reliance is actually one of the factors. Another issue they raise is national fragility. I'm talking about insecurity in Nigeria. Our agricultural production has gone down as a result of insecurity. A lot of people have not been able to go to their farms. Look at places like Benue, for instance. They've been having incessant attacks, so most of them are not farming. Plateau State also, and some other parts of the north. We're talking about Adamawa, Borno, Zamfara, and so many other places in the north as a result of insecurity, which the World Bank terms national fragility. This has also contributed greatly to part of the reasons why they said poverty will actually increase in Nigeria. Coming back to Nigeria now, away from the report for a moment, in your own opinion, Mr. Ikechukwu Kalu, at this particular point in time, what do you think are the key factors, the biggest factors driving the rise of poverty in Nigeria?
Yeah, like you said, like you mentioned, you just touched on one very critical item, which is security. I've always maintained that our infrastructure, our security architecture, sort of leave the police behind. And when you use the army or the Air Force, the other defense forces to sort of try to take out an external enemy, which they are designed for, one of the challenges you have is that you need to hold the ground, you need to restore order, you need some basic sense of people being able to maintain law and order. Once that doesn't exist, it's almost like there's a vacuum. And the good book says when the demons find the place empty, they come back with 7 more. And we can see that there's also always a resurgence when we move these people, and meaning that those economies, those places, they are largely ungoverned spaces. And there are multiplicities of factors that are around it. We can go back to the functionality of local government and how the absence of it has made rural economy unproductive, and as such, youths are migrating and then leaving the old people. The few that are left, they have no option than to join gangs and then to be partaking in the black economy. So we can see that security is a very, very sore point. There are also clashes around resource, water, grazing routes. The federal government has to come up hard. There was a time that Ruga was proposed. Today we have livestock ministry. We are looking into the livestock ministry and seeing how we can, it's still in the formation stage, or they're still at the very beginning, so we can give them some leverage to say, with time, if we can get the livestock sector running, so that people don't have to move cattle around. Because one of the, if you do a mapping of where we know where these cases are, their constancy and their time in the year where some of these things happen, March, April, September, in different zones. Why? Especially the farmer herder clutches, because of water needs. They have to move cattle to go and get water. In the process, they eat up people's farming stuff, and that's constant tension. We need to avoid it by investing in a livestock sector. That's very critical. I mean, because it's the underpinning basis for our rural economy. We still run our economy outside Lagos and Abuja and the big cities are largely rural, driven by agriculture. So once we nip that in the bud, I'm sure that agriculture, I'm sure we'll see some improvement. There've been a lot of investment around special agro processing zone, $1.2 billion being funded by AFDB. I expect that would improve capacity at that level in the states. There are about 11 states, 8 states in the first category. We've seen flag off in Kaduna, we've seen flag off in Cross River, and you can mention that in those 2 states, they're not as those clashes are not as high as that. So we expect that states to join on board and be able to join. So that's from security to investment in agri to investment in rural economy, local order, investment in policing, investment. We need to make that investment in human capital as well, because a lot of these people, even if you want to employ them, are they employable? What can they do? How can we train them? What exactly is federal government going to do, or the state example? What level of investment beyond basic education, and what's the quality of basic education that we're providing to them, knowing that the economy in the world has switched to digital? And know how powerful are some of the things we're providing for them, how integrated.
All right, Mr. Ikechukwu-Kalu, just before you proceed, I was actually going to ask you about the solution right there, but you seem to have been giving us some of the possible solutions to what we are facing right now. But before we go deeply into that, let us look at the Nigerian government, for instance. The economic reforms of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So far, how have they been working? To the average Nigerian on the street, people, like I said before, are going through hardship. A lot of Nigerians, if not majority, are living below international poverty level. That's the reality on ground. That's the harsh reality. So what exactly is happening right here? When this administration came in, they promised the people a lot of things. They have economic reforms, they will implement them and things will get better. But over time, things have actually become worse according to various indicators, not just the ones mentioned by the World Bank and IMF, which we cannot deny. The question is, why are the economic reforms not working in Nigeria? Is it as a result of corruption? We have a National Assembly who are busy, who are more interested in luxury, approving monies for renovation of their residents, residential quarters and their offices, and purchase of SUVs and all that. So are we really having a problem? Is the real challenge here corruption, lack of accountability and integrity? Or what else do you think is the reason why economic reforms in Nigeria are not working right now?
I think it different. I think that to answer that question, I think I see it differently. I think the reforms are working, but then it would require more time. And I would list out certain statistics. If you look at the oil sector, for instance, if you look at the investments that have been into upstream, we have more investments that have come in. Shell is closing. We have many people showing interest in terms of investment in that space. And when those investments maturate, what will happen is it trickle down into employment, it trickle down into at that level. You also see that in the FX space, we can see that manufacturers are able to source FX much more easier. We can see that every player in the economy, there's no arbitrage again. You go to the market, go and buy your dollars and sell. It's available. When it was back then, you had to know somebody in CBN for you to be able to get that. And that's a disincentive to business. People were basically trading the dollars on streets and left legitimate businesses. But right now, we can see that that space is opening up. We can see that there are moves to be able to ensure that some level of construction are going on, but these things won't be built in a day. I mean, it's going to need time to get into. We'll need a certain level of time. When the government came in, we were almost a basket case. We were owing plus NNPC was owing up to $6 billion to creditors, meaning that they could have stopped to supply us fuel at the time that they came in. But then, because of the removal of subsidy, we can see that between then and now, we've really had issues around supply of oil, fuel. We have that moving very smoothly.
Sorry to cut in. Sorry to cut in, Ikechukwu. I have to cut in right here. I really like your optimism. You believe the economic reforms will work, but as it is right now, they are not working. You just talked about the oil and gas sector. We have some statistics. You said things have improved, but we are still having problems with transparency and integrity. For instance, let me give you an example. The NNPCL, the former boss of NNPCL, Mele Kyari, recently some people, were protesting and they are calling for his probe, for him to be probed and prosecuted because under him, some contracts were signed that do not really make any logical sense. For instance, a particular organization, Matrix Energy Limited, is being owed over $2 billion by NNPCL, okay, for a project that the FEC actually approved billions of dollars. For that same project, they are owing Matrix Energy, and they are now giving Matrix Energy Limited daily fuel allocation, daily crude allocation just to pay back. So we have some forward contract. So a lot of things are going on. So don't you think we still have problem of transparency and integrity in the oil and gas sector, despite the improvements you're talking about?
So when we say improvement, the word improvement itself is self-explanatory. It means that something was in a particular state and then it's improved. So we must learn to acknowledge that things have improved. I made a specific example as to supply of PMS, and then you moved to transparency. Transparency, these are stages. If it was transparent, you could point out another issue. I know the issue of matrix and default contracts and all that. These are disputes within company disputes that happen in business transactions. Would allow that to play out. People would protest. There are private companies that are having disputes. I had a bank that had issues with one of his staff just recently, yesterday. There are companies always having issues.
But NNPCL is a public organization. We are talking about NNPCL now. It's a public institution.
I do agree, but you know that NNPC had gone through a reform. 3 years ago, NNPC wasn't accountable to anybody. They didn't publish reports, they didn't publish it. But from 2022, we saw audited reports being published openly. We've seen 2023 version. We are waiting for 2024. There has been improvement. You might say it's not enough, but you cannot say there's no improvement. And we must be honest enough to admit that, okay, and that's why I say beyond an NPC, it's a whole gamut of an industry. The industry itself is being more transparent. We are seeing contracts being put out. We are seeing approvals getting out. We've seen divestments that have happened, about 5 divestments in 2024 from Exxon selling to Seplat. These are significant transactions, and they go beyond just government to government. These are things that have been held down by approvals that will take years in the past, so we must, that's why I said we must acknowledge at some point where we see certain level of improvement. We can see in CBN that the CBN is reforming itself. It's not lending itself to development finance. It said it's going to stick to orthodoxy. It said it's going to stick to its time plan in terms of how it conducts its business. And we have seen that example in the past 2 years, so when we must be able to balance our conversation to say exactly what works, what is not working, and what works. We clearly know what's not working. But then we are seeing improvement in certain areas. We are seeing roads that are being launched. We are seeing new roads. Some are handed over to private sector. We are seeing access to passports, easier access to passport digitization in that space. We are seeing certain things. There are improvements in aviation. We can see legislations that have been adjusted so that people
all right. So sorry to cut in, Mr. Ikechukwu. So are you saying categorically that the World Bank is wrong when they said that Nigeria's economic reforms are failing?
I'm not sure that that's the word that they use. They didn't say they are failing.
No, that's insinuation. If you go through that report, at some point, you're like, the economic reforms are not working because things are degenerating in Nigeria. That's basically the summary of that report.
Okay, so what I got from the report was that the economic reforms has to be sustained over a period of, and it was clearly written there that if these economic reforms are sustained, we expect that in 2027 or so, that we would see much more improvement. And the reality is that as an economist, everybody's going to have their opinion. I have my opinion as to, I believe that World Bank is predicting 3.6. I was predicting 4.2 for the economy in terms of what we do in GDP this year. Why? Because I believe that if oil gets back to $60, $70, it just puts us in a very good light. And the World Bank didn't see oil going. They didn't see Trump tariff coming, and it wasn't in their predictions 3 months ago. So we cannot take that as a gospel doctrine that whatever they say is going to happen, because they don't even see tomorrow. So 6 months down the line, they can change their outlook. They can change their prediction. So these are just people who, they're economists like us too, who are making calculations and deductions. So it's a case of, in economics, we say if all things are equal, so we have to always leave that provision and not make it look like it's a fait accompli. That would be my advice.
Oh, okay, absolutely. Well said, Mr. Ikechukwu Kalu. The World Bank have made their predictions, and like you said, we have to consider other factors as well. But I'm asking you as a Nigerian. Let us come back to Nigeria now. The situation of things, you are a Nigerian. You know the cost of food, cost of transportation, cost of accommodation and accommodation services, hotel services and all that. Everything has been on the high side. The harsh reality is biting really hard on Nigerians. So my question to you is this. Looking at the economic reforms, and you said it would take time for them to work. Now, let's look at the federal government's position. Do you see the federal government of Nigeria being transparent enough and acknowledging that so far this is the reality? Or they are just giving us results and saying, oh, things are working, because we have people in the presidency, we have people in the administration who don't even want to accept that some of these reforms are not working. So do you think the government is being honest and transparent enough to say, see, poverty is actually increasing in Nigeria?
So I try very much as very possible, because when we say some of these things, we must also understand that perception matters a lot. Which government will come out and say that, okay, what we're doing is not working? We must understand, especially in the first few months, we must understand nuances in terms of how we communicate. What we owe the government is to say, hey, this is the number, this is what people are going through. The government now looks at us and say, this is what I'm doing. We can say, this is not enough, we need X, Y, Z, and you are providing A, B, C, meaning that you are not meeting our expectations. But the reality is that when we say, is FG admitting that things are bad? And like I said, I heard the president give a speech and said that, yes, things are in his budget speech, he said the inflation is high, but we will take it down. That's an admission. That he also said the deficit is high and that they will try to sell down certain JV assets. So these things are, to sell a JV asset is not something.
I think we lost audio connection there. Okay. Mr. Ikechukwu Kalu, can you hear me? Are you with us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, please go ahead. We lost you for a few seconds right there. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I'm saying that FG has to provide hope to the people. I do not deny that we have a clear case of people are going through excruciating pain as a result of the economic reforms. I mentioned that those twin policies, subsidy removal and FX, were because of, it was a sharp pain, it's a shock therapy. It's like giving somebody a shock therapy, and people are feeling it. So what the FG needs to do, and which what the World Bank has advised, is that people who are worst hit should be provided with cushion, some level of cushion. If it has to be payment, if it has to be support, some level of, we have to design that system that ensure that puts money in people's hands. But apart from putting money in people's hands, is to create more opportunities for people to be employed and gain gainful living, as also to become more productive, so that this, as more production happens, the prices would also come down. So these are things that, it's a fallout that was expected from the reforms, meaning that prices were going to go up. But what we do after that is almost like somebody who goes through a cancer treatment and they say chemotherapy. There's a fallout that you already know that was going to happen. But how do you manage that fallout? It is what Nigerians are crying out now to say, how does the government manage that fallout? And that fallout and that management goes beyond FG. And when we always analyze the economy, there's always that temptation to skip other arms of government. The states government, the LGs, are getting ×3 of what they used to get before. Some of them are we are beginning to see some of them take some more steps in terms of provision of facilities, in terms of provision of cushion, where we see more health centers. Some of them are trying to do more roads. These are initial steps of trying to provide more succor. And that, as that continues, it becomes bearable over time. And that's why I said there's a time element where all of these things come together and they begin to impact. I've seen certain states, in Anambra State, clearly right now, you don't pay for antenatal up to giving birth. That's free, whether there's a surgery involved or nothing. In places like Okpoko, the complete slum regeneration. And that's the poverty zone. That's how to bring people out of poverty, regenerate that whole place. And it was done by the state government. They didn't need to. Schools are being rehabilitated because they get more. You can see states like Abia State, they're beginning to dip into Aba, trying to regenerate urban renewal. It's this massive one. And that's going to lift because businesses would now be able to be more productive. They can get to their places, they can bring in goods because the roads are better. So our conversation now needs to tailor into how do we help Nigerians become more productive from government levels? What do we do with power? What do we do with critical roads? What do we do? And that will drive down cost over time, logistic costs. It will drive down cost of production of cement, because which is the key ingredient. I know rent, food, and all that are the key pressure points. So in those key pressure points, we now need to, I mentioned what was happening with agriculture, AFDB. We are seeing what Ekiti State is doing in terms of investing in youth, having cluster farming. I think many other states should copy that, and federal government should fund that process, mechanize it, and ensure that foods are in large quantity, and then we don't have this problem of, though I must admit that prices are beginning to tend downwards a bit, but it needs to be more sustained in terms of food pricing. That price needs to come down the more, and that would require more investment, which federal government has to source that money, both federal, states, and local government. We have to hold all levels of government to account so that they can.
All right. All right, Ikechukwu Kalu. Like you said, we have to hold governments at all levels accountable for this. You mentioned a state like Abia State and what they are doing. Quite interesting. Recently, some governors visited Abia State, and a lot of commendations to the Abia State governor that how is he doing it. Even former President Goodluck Jonathan said, if you want to learn transparency and democratic rule, you should visit Abia State. Even a former governor, Rotimi Amechi, he couldn't hide his surprise. He said, how is Alex Oti getting the money? Where is he getting the money from? So it simply means some governors, some leaders are, having more initiative, are being more proactive than others. So do you think that the state governors should actually be doing more at this time and not just focus all your attention on the federal government?
Yes. I think, like I said, some are doing more already. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Some are doing more already. We mentioned Abia State.
All right. A little technical error right there. Little technical glitch. I believe you can. Oh, okay. All right. I believe you're still with us. If you can still hear me, Mr. Ikichuku
Yes, I
Kanu,
can hear
are you
you.
still with us? Okay.
Yes,
Please go ahead, just so we can conclude right now. Our second guest is waiting. Just before you land on that point, let me just quickly add this to it so you can just speak on it once and for all. Now, what do you think, as an economist, okay, what targeted strategies or intervention, okay, can the government put in place to reduce poverty in the short term? You have said it, that these economic reforms will take time, fine. But what strategies, what targeted strategies or interventions should we be looking at just to reduce poverty in the short run?
Okay, thank you very much. I would say that the government need to identify all economic productive hubs in Nigeria, or maybe markets, all productive hubs. Take trade fair complex, take Oluwole in Lagos, take Aba, and dedicate power, at least 15, 16 hours power. If it means dedicating the 4,000 to them, so that we must ensure that production is prioritized beyond comfort. Production is prioritized. People who are producing are their first line of defense. So that we can fund production, we must ensure that our ports, goods can come in, and within 2-3 days, you can clear out your goods from the port. That's number two. We can also ensure that we have a strike force